Hi. Oh, good to see you. How are you doing?
It's so good to see you. It's just been a good day. Clients, dance class,
Nice.
very
What
easy.
kind of dance are you doing?
I've been really into Zumba lately.
Okay. A little of a young
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to be an older crowd, so I'm one of the younger ones, but it's
Okay.
a lot of fun.
That's
How are
convenient.
you doing?
Good.
Yeah.
And I shifted from tango dancing to country dance. So,
Oh,
but
so cool.
that's near where I am. It's fun.
That's great. I didn't know that you tango. That's
That
deep.
was
That's
my
that's
my profession before I became a healer. So
oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that.
yeah, so okay, let me introduce myself first for the ones who don't know me, and I will introduce you. I am Virginia Kelly. I'm a psychotherapist, acupuncturist, energy healer, and holistic coach. And today we are with Britta. And can you please tell the viewers what is that you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Britta Van Dun, and I'm a licensed acupuncturist here in Tucson, Arizona. And I practice intuitive coaching, which I've done for the last probably dozen or more years. I'm a student of homeopathy. I offer craniosacral and Reiki, any kind of hands-on healing, as well as more subtle energy medicine.
Good. So tell the viewers how is that you went from energy healer to kind of like channel, really.
Well, I love that you chose that title for our conversation because I don't know if I would have self identified as a channel. What I've noticed over the years in working with people is that I open up to something bigger than myself in order for the healing to happen. And I've been doing that for a long time. I have probably a 20-year meditation and yoga practice. And so there's always this sort of recognition of source, whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting because more and more I find myself quieting in sessions, listening with my ears, listening with my whole body, listening with the more kind of psychic antenna, and leaving the answers and some of the deeper questions open to something greater than myself, which then guides the sessions. I am not necessarily in touch with specific guides, although I'll sense energy and I'll sense light and I'll sense all kinds of things. But I don't have like a whole clear picture of, ascended masters or, archangels or something like that.
Yes, I like to say that when I receive information, it's from spirit. Now, whose spirit? I don't know. I just receive information, and for me, the path hasn't been very straightforward because from all the clairs are more clarisentient. I feel things in my body. So I remember when I first started with energy healer, it was the Mind Silva method back in the days when I was in high school, which, at the time it was revolutionary on the West, and people in the East didn't think much of it, and then it came out that it had some like building errors, so to speak. But I remember practicing with my classmates. I was a kid, I was playing literally. And I didn't give much credit to it at the time. And here would come someone with a headache, and I would do hand in position while my classmates were poking me and, pulling from my braids. And something weird happened that I couldn't explain at the time. I was picking up on their headache, and and then they were like, "Thank you," and I was like, "This is really a bad business model." So little that I knew at the time is like I was receiving information, I just couldn't decode it. I was like, "Wait a minute, are headaches contagious? How does this work?" Anyway, it was a novelty in the beginning, and then that was that. And I needed to experience other things at the time. But ever since childhood, I was very connected. I just didn't know how plugged in I was or to who. whom like I had an ongoing relationship with my deceased grandmother that I never met because she died before I was born. And I thought it was in my mind, but uh, basically, throughout the years, things that I got through her either came to pass or manifested in some way that to the point that it defeated the odds of chance, so to speak. So I came to the realization that I was in contact, that it wasn't just in my head. Do you have any experience like that?
I do have experiences like that, not quite exactly the same. What I've noticed over the years in terms of being open to the intuitive is being able to suspend disbelief has been such a big part of growing my practice and my way of connecting, because I grew up in a very, very atheist home. And so even talking about energy was forbidden. And so there was this sense that anything that's invisible to the naked eye, anything that's more subtle, anything that might have a feeling of new age, not allowed. So over time, what I realized is if I can allow just the possibility of something, and at the same time, I'm very much, I'm empirically minded. I'm very interested in facts, and I'm very interested in direct experience. So unless I have a direct experience of something, of some kind of modality that's actually effective for me personally, those are the only kinds of modalities that I will practice and offer to my clients. If, and I know that there's a million things that work. I know that there's a million methods that people swear by, and I believe them, but I can only stand behind the things that I know have worked for me. And I've had a visceral felt sense experience, and I have witnessed actual real change from those approaches.
It's funny that
Yeah.
you
What about?
mentioned because I feel that skepticism is actually a requirement to do this work because I have
Yeah.
been in so many workshops with a lot of um good intent people, but they were like too hocus pocus, and it was very hard to actually tune in what was real versus what was not real. I personally come from a family of health providers. My dad was a doctor and my mom was a nurse. So they were very instructed in the empirical methods. But I remember when we were children, if traditional medicine did, or Western, should I said Western medicine did not work at the time for whatever was going on, they had no problem going. We were in the outskirts of the city, they had no problem going to the countryside and checking with the witchcraft doctors and learning their techniques. And we were forbidden from saying anything and jeopardizing their reputation. But basically, what my dad taught me is that what we call miracle, it's an actual fact that we haven't discovered yet. And I remember he would perform this technique on us that we call tirar el cuerito, which would mean in English to pull it literally means pull the leather, and basically is pulling the skin off the back up until your spine cracked whenever we had, indigestion or something like that. And nobody could explain how it worked up until at some point, they came to the realization that that was basically a chiropractic adjustment through negative pressure, not applying pressure, but taking pressure away. So as simple as that. But before that, it was like, whoa. And then after that,
Yeah. I
everybody
can.
started doing it.
Right. Yeah. The stigma was gone. It's so funny because my dad taught me that technique. He was a physical therapist, and he taught me that technique when I was little. And it's interesting because it wasn't until I graduated from acupuncture school that I found out that my grandmother had been a healer, my great grandmother had been a healer, my auntie was an intuitive, so all of the information started to flow after I had gone through my initiation and training. So it's funny how this information gets handed down, but sometimes it's also cloaked in obscurity, and we have to kind of dig through and reclaim it again.
It's sort of in the muscle memory, in the cellular memory of the lineage. But I feel that starting with formal schooling, even though acupuncture is already a discipline that some people choose not to believe in it, not that it's a religion, and we have um, data from double-blind trials and whatnot. But I feel that the it's of the essence to start with some kind of formal training that grounds you in order to be able to open up to more subtle realms. Because if you're not grounded, then is the how you deal with the energy throws you all over the place.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's so well said. And I really liked your comment about skepticism being necessary because it's so easy for this to become imaginal or
Yes.
imaginary, like receiving more subtle information. It's by very nature is very subtle, and you can't pin it down, and you can't say like, okay, where is the evidence behind that? And so I agree, having the foundation in Chinese medicine and acupuncture was the point of entry for me to feel safe and to feel legitimate, and that I had a science of medicine behind me. And then from there, just in working with people, and you and I were talking about this the other day, with enough hours of hands on, with enough hours of conversation, you can start to attune to the more subtle, right? You're not so lasered in on like a physical symptom. You can actually pan out and say, like, what else is here? What else is going on?
Yeah, something I experience often is I'm with a client and we're talking about the weather as and I'm going through the treatment. I feel that my hand gravitates toward making some point and throwing needle in some point, and I stop myself and I question my rationale. Why am I gonna do that point? Without saying it out loud at that moment, often the patient is like, oh, by the way, I also have this, and that. And I'm like, oh, okay, it makes sense. And I continue like nothing. So over time, when I have this repeated experiences, I learn to trust that there is this subtle feel in which we're communicating even beyond our conscious mind. And I'm a therapist, so I'm all about the unconscious mind as well. So the collective unconscious and how we connect with each other in this subtle field, and how much of the communication is not actually verbal and so on. But that's a whole another kind of worms there.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and it's a really apropos can of worms. I mean, I have the same experience where I'll just be, I'll just scan the body and my finger will go, right there. And they're like, oh yeah, I wanted to mention that. And so it's really beautiful. I think, when I was thinking about the word channeling this morning and just the experience of channeling, and we're all channeling all the time.
Yes.
And it depends like what filters are there to determine how we're going to receive information, what we're going to relay, what we value, what's important. And so much of, I think, my practice and what I offer people is being able to come into a space of stillness where it's not Britta anymore. It's just realizing the stillness that is with us always, 360 degrees, always already, and being able to quiet into that. And then from there, right, what emerges and what's revealed is usually the message or the information that's most salient or most pressing in that moment in the conversation, not just with words between two people, but the two bodies kind of that are, connecting and resonating with each other and grounding with each other.
I remember I was visiting my family back in Argentina, and my dad was an old school doctor. And he, at the time, he was a member of the International Committee of Anesthesia, the 20 best in the world at the time. So he was very well respected. And, above the desk, all the all the titles and whatnot, the certificates, and under the desk, all the books of mysticism that he kept, feeding me. And one day, this friend of mine rings the bell. So he goes to look through the visor, and he calls me and is like, Virginia, a friend of yours, by the way, she's in a lot of pain. I'm like, how did you know? Oh, just the lines of her face. And he kept about his business, and he wasn't into facial diagnosis or Chinese. Well, actually, he was into Chinese medicine, more from the pain management aspect, because of anesthesia, right? And he has so many funny stories. He was kind of a Dr. House. But it kind of hit me how doctors were trained back in the days, and observation, it was just one of the basic skills of a consultation. And it seems that a lot of that, in the rush of today's days, that is basically trying to beat the clock and quantity over quality, how much of that is lost?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's such an interesting time. Your dad sounds like an amazing guy.
He was a
And
funny guy, yes.
I'm sure. Yeah, and like I mean, it just reminds me too of my dad was head of PT at Norwalk Hospital, and he started experimenting with using needles. He'd heard about acupuncture. I don't know if it was legal yet in the States or it had just become legal. I think it was 1975 when it was legalized in the States. And he started dabbling and playing with it. And so he had this, I wouldn't say carte blanche at the hospital, but there were a lot less rules and regulations. So he was experimenting and seeing what worked and what didn't. And then I think like the director of the hospital was like, cut it out, like don't do that anymore. But it's fascinating because I think that the natural curiosity and the innate desire to help and to heal people was maybe paramount more in the way that now there's all of these malpractice and this policy and you can't do this and you have to do it this way and you have to learn this and this pharmaceutical company is subsidizing this class in medical school, so it becomes
Yes.
like a very different animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in Argentina, to be an acupuncturist or to be a homeopath, you actually have to be a doctor first. So, with that, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the limitation that you cannot go straight into it, but also the recognition. My dad at the time had a little bit more leeway because he was the director of the hospital. Then there was a coup and they removed it. They removed him. But anyway, while he was the boss, there are very funny anecdotes. Like one day, this guy shows up with back pain and he's expecting some kind of pain management in the form of injections. And my dad had recently come from the East, and he was very open to learn new techniques. So here he went to try the Ashi points, basically. And for the viewers, as are points of pain. And so not even with acupuncture needles, with injectable needles, he needles the patient. The patient is laying down, puts the needles on his back. He didn't have moxa. Moxibustion, for the viewers, is we combust the mugwort herb that has a lot of healing properties and is very warming in nature and penetrating. So he put cotton balls on top of the needles and set them on fire. So at that moment, the nurse walks in, and what's her comment? Are we celebrating his birthday? So they are cracking up. The patient has no idea what's going on, but he felt better, So my dad experimented a lot. And when he was in all our surgeries, I remember I had tonsillectomy and he was doing my anesthesia. And I remember waking up from the surgery with 2 moles on large intestine 4. And basically he was hooking me up to the electrical stimulation machine. and monitoring the response and whatnot. So yeah, he was a trip.
That's amazing. I love it. And the more stories you tell, the more I can relate because my dad would come home with like the tens units at the time and just experiment with us and be like, no, it's not going to shock you that bad. And we're like,
Yeah, we hated him for it.
exactly, guinea pigs. And you know what you're touching on too, it's so important because what I realized in my own practice is that there are some approaches that work for me and there are other approaches that are just as valuable that don't really work. And I don't feel like there's been as much conversation with individuals, with clients and patients who are going towards a particular system of medicine because they think that's the answer, and it may or may not have the answer for them. You know, some people are respond incredibly well to acupuncture. Some people respond really well to Chinese herbs. Other people can't tolerate Chinese herbs. Other people do really well with homeopathy. Other people are like, that didn't do anything for me. Or Ayurveda or allopathic Western medicine, right? Like somebody can have a cortisol shot and they're right as rain for years after that one shot, and somebody else can have 6 shots, you know, every month and they don't notice a difference. So I hope that that's a message that our viewers can also hear, is that if you're not finding something that works for you, try something different. Like keep trying different modalities until you find something that works for you. And like with your dad, like I wouldn't recommend burning a cotton ball at the tip of a needle, you know, but like if you can go to different people and find what works. Because I think, you know, and Virginia, I wonder if this is your experience too, is that I feel like a lot of the people who end up at my door are people who have tried so many other things
Yes.
and they're just at the end of their rope and they're like, fine, I'm going to try this thing because what do I have to lose? Is that your experience as well?
Pretty much. Every once in a while, you get someone who is and is skeptical, and if they actually give it a try, they get surprised. A lot of people do it once, and basically, it's funny how the non-believers, not that is a religion, um, are the ones who expect a miracle, and even if they get the benefit, they will label it psychosomatic or placebo, because everybody has their filters. And that's why I feel, going back a little bit to the energy word, is good uh, to test the filter from where you're receiving information and expand that, and basically develop a language also. At some point, because I was tuning in so much data, that it was difficult for me to recognize, for example, um, when if I had let's say if I had a headache, if the headache was mine or it was from the patient who just walked into the office and tells me I'm here for a headache. I did some training with a medium, and she helped
Mm.
me a lot in developing the language through understanding how this works and doing exercises. And not to go completely off subject, but just to give you an example, here, one of the things I have to do, it was read X amount of people. So here I call a friend of mine, and when I tell him that this was my homework, I know he's ready to pull my leg, right? So he's like, yes, sure, of course. Let me help you out here. I have someone you can read. So he comes to my apartment, and right then and there, he asks me, how's Bob? And I'm like, don't tell me the name. You already told me the name and the sex, as I need to know if I'm plugging into the right energy. So don't tell me anything, and let me see if I can tune in. And I start feeling like choked. And because I'm more clairsentient, I go all around the possibilities of getting choked. He hanged himself. He choked with something he was eating. Um, he had a tumor. I don't know. It's like I went through all the possibilities. It was no, 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 no. So I at some point I'm like, okay, I give up. How did he die? And his response was he was put down. And I'm like, wait, was this a
Mm,
dog? I'm like, this is brilliant. It put me on a leash. So my
mm,
friend asked me, do you know how to read? And he was, I don't know how I'm reading. I'm just experimenting with this. And it's like we have sometimes preconceived ideas of how things are going to work. And if we just open up our senses to the input and the information, we start developing that language. Now, it's easier for us that we're in this path than for someone who comes to see us, that they might already have, for the most part, the people that come to see us, they're open to our work, right? But sometimes it takes the patients a minute to realize how this is actually working.
yeah, yeah, agreed. And it can be, the information can be so wild when we allow ourselves to just, I guess, not interpret, right? But just to share the image that we see or the sensation we feel. I found that I would get into trouble when I was trying to make it make sense.
Oh, yes,
So, right? So I had it, and so we end up translating, but then we miss the actual meaning. But I had a client yesterday who her symptoms are very deeply tied in with her nervous system. And so she'll get to places where she relaxes and softens, and then she's calm. And then as soon as that happens, she'll remember her symptomology pattern, and then she'll jump right back into it. And so while I was working with her and I was doing hands-on, I dropped some needles, like everything was flowing. I was doing some cranio. And then I asked, like, so a lot of the time I'll just kind of psychically ask a symptom, what's going on? And I just was like, what's with the hypervigilance? Like, why is there a hypervigilance and an attunement of not being able to let this go? Why is the nervous system continuing to loop on this sympathetic registry? And I immediately heard that it was related to her mom, who had passed away when her mom was only 28. So she was very young. And she had this vigilance in her nervous system to keep, is that mom? Where's mom? Where's mom? And at first I thought, no, there's no way, right? Like that's way too much of a jump. I'm not going to. When I shared it with the client, she started to tear up and she said, that deeply resonates for me.
yes,
I feel like I have been looking out for my mom since she died when I was a little kid.
yes.
And yeah,
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah. And in my
And
mind, it's so, but they're woven together, right? The emotional bodies, the psychic bodies, the physical bodies, the nervous system, all of these aspects of body are all kind of intertwined. And
definitely,
it's us find that Gordian knot, right? To touch into that Gordian knot. I remember very early on in my schooling, actually, I was sitting with a friend and he had this terrible pain in his back at the scapula. And I said, oh, let me massage it for you. And he was just like, that's fine. Basically, I've worked with all the best practitioners. Nobody's been able to help me. And I was like, well, I can try, give me a chance. And I just started gently palpating it. And then I just heard it. And it just seemed like it was kind of holding on for dear life, right? There's usually some kind of stress or trauma that it's protecting. And so I just thought to it, you can trust me. And I didn't even think about thinking that, right? It just kind of came through and that knot just bloomed open and completely softened. And he looked at me and he was like, and it's like, I don't know where this is coming from. Like none of this is this cognitive, right? It's not this linear thinking. It's not planned. It's not me, Britta, thinking of doing something or responding to something. It's just, being in the moment, being present for what is.
yes. And how about childhood experiences?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Childhood experiences. I know they were not allowed at home, but what was your experience as a child? Because I feel that a lot of us come with a mission that is already from birth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few layers to that. I believe that I developed a like pretty wide antennas as a young person out of necessity. I grew up in a pretty unstable, pretty dysfunctional household, and some part of me was always just attuned to what's happening next. I didn't like surprises, so I wanted to know what's going on in the other
So that
room. You
was
know,
your
what's the
initiation.
yeah, essentially, yes. And there was like some childhood things that happened, some childhood traumas um but what I would see spirits when I was a little kid. I would often like wake up in the middle of the night and I would sense a presence in the room. And that's usually how I experienced it. And then I also had moments where I think I remember that I was studying a creosote plant. I was a little kid, I was in the backyard and near a wash, and there was this chaparral bush, and I was just looking at the little pom-pom puffballs of the plant. And something happened where everything was suddenly expanded and everything was infinite and all one. And I was just like, oh, okay. But there was something that happened that moment where I was reminded that this 3D consensus reality is just a small part of what's actually available. And then when I was 8, I had a near-death experience where my grandparents lived on a houseboat in the Netherlands, and my brother and I were playing on the frozen canals, and I actually fell through the ice. And I was
Wow.
wearing little moon boots, so those got really heavy, and I was just sinking down. And the water was this really beautiful green, and I was watching all these bubbles rise. And I just thought to myself, well, this is really peaceful. This is really lovely. I've had a good 8 years. And then,
Mission
so I,
accomplished.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've done what I've needed to do here. Thank you. I'm out. Um, and I actually had multiple near-death experiences. I almost died when I was 2. I almost died again when I was 12. So those kinds of things I think
You
also
defy
add to the
death.
mix. I know, I keep cheating it. Yeah. What about you and your childhood?
Our time is almost up, but you know what? Let's go through. If anything, I'll try to reconnect again and add it later. I was kind of a freaky child, a typical Scorpio child that parents don't know what to do with you, right? And I remember one day my parents go out and they call a babysitter, and she asked me if I wanted her to read me a bedtime story. And I said, no, read the apocalypse. She was totally thrown off. Not that my family was too religious, even though I'm Maria Virginia after Virgin Mary. And she's like, do you know what this means? And I'm like, no, but it sounds interesting. So when she goes on to explain that this is about the end of the world, in her understanding, my response was like, cool. Tell me all about it, right? So she goes into the
Yeah.
horses and whatnot, and here I end up falling asleep. I forget all about it. Next day, my mom wakes me up and she's asking me, how did it go last night? And I said, oh, fine, but in the future, I'm gonna live through the apocalypse. And she was like, okay, whatever. This is Virginia. 11 years later comes my sister, another Scorpio, and she tells my mom a similar story, right? So my poor mother was like, okay, whatever. So when the whole thing of, the pandemic started, I'm talking with my sister and it's like, listen, we chose this time. I don't know why, but here we are. And I think our contribution is to help people go through these difficult times.
Yeah, I love that. And agreed. I think when we've gone through enough and we've had enough initiations of real life experience, and we have somewhat of a roadmap, and we can help others and just like, oh, here's a flashlight, here's some snacks. Yeah.
And before this gets cut off, where do people can find you?
So I can be found at intuitivehealthhealing.com. You can just Google Britta Van Dun. Last name is VAN space DUN. And I'm in Tucson, Arizona, but I work with clients from all over the world and nationally. So that's probably the easiest. And then there's going to be Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn links on my website.
Okay, I
Thank
will put
you.
the link below so everybody can go directly to you. Britta, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. And let's hope to do this again sometime in the future.
I love it. Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you next. This has been great. Thank you.